The story I'm about to tell you happened in one small town, on one ordinary summer night, and it would take 10 long years, and a completely random stranger at an auto repair shop, to finally crack it open. A young mother was killed inside the very business she'd spent years building with her own hands. The killer left behind blood. He left behind fingerprints. Investigators even got a description of his face. And still, for a full decade, he walked free, got married, had a child of his own, and lived only a short drive from where it happened. This is the story of how one small town lie unraveled after 10 years of silence. Welcome back to the Cold Case Archive. Let's get into it. Before we go deeper into this one, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we cover cases like this every single week, cases that mainstream media barely touched. And if you're already part of this community, drop a like right now. It genuinely helps this story reach the people who need to hear it. Okay, let's go back to where it all began. Dana Satterfield was born in the fall of 1967, in a quiet corner of upstate South Carolina. She grew up in a tight-knit, faith-centered household, the kind of family where Sunday dinners mattered and neighbors were treated like extended relatives. Everyone who crossed paths with Dana seemed to describe her the exact same way: warm, generous, and impossible not to like. She was the friend who showed up with a casserole before you even asked for help. The kind of person who remembered your birthday without being reminded. From a young age, Dana had one clear passion: beauty and hairstyling. Right after finishing high school, she trained as a stylist and began working in salons around her hometown. It didn't take long for her talent to show. Clients requested her by name. Co-workers noticed how naturally the work came to her. She eventually settled in a small town neighboring where she'd grown up, and not long after finishing school, she married a man named Mike. Together they had 2 children, a daughter and a son, and Dana split her life between motherhood and her growing career behind the chair. For years, she quietly saved every dollar she could, chasing one specific goal: her own salon. A place with her name on the door. Eventually, that dream became real. She opened a small salon of her own, and while the business demanded nearly everything she had, long hours, constant hustle, juggling 2 young kids at home, she was finally doing exactly what she'd always wanted. By the summer of 1995, Dana was 27 years old. A working mother, a business owner, a woman still building the life she'd been chasing since she was a teenager. She had no idea that summer would be her last. On the 31st of July, 1995, at roughly 8:30 in the evening, a call came into local police. The caller was a woman named Diane. She explained that she'd been standing near Dana's salon, waiting on a ride, when she heard something strange, dull, heavy thuds coming from inside the darkened building. Then, a loud crash. And then she watched a man burst out through a window and take off. Diane knew Dana personally. In fact, she'd been inside the salon herself just 2 hours earlier, selling Dana some cleaning supplies for the shop. And only about 20 minutes before she heard that crash, Diane had walked past the salon again, and everything had looked completely normal. The lights were on. Dana was inside, cleaning up for the night. She'd even waved at Diane through the window. So when Diane later saw the lights off and a strange man diving out through broken glass, her first thought wasn't panic, it was confusion. She assumed Dana had already left for the evening, and that someone had simply broken in after hours. She didn't own a cell phone, so she rushed into a nearby store to call for help. And in a moment that must have chilled her to the bone, the very same man she'd just watched flee the salon walked in right behind her. He looked at her, said nothing, and walked back out. That was enough. Diane called 911 immediately. A patrol officer happened to be close by and arrived expecting a routine break-in call. What he found instead was nothing close to routine. Moving through the salon with his flashlight, the officer didn't see anything unusual at first glance. But when he reached the back room, he found Dana. Her clothing had been partially removed. Her body was covered in scrapes and bruising. And around her neck was a belt, the other end tied off to a water heater, her body left hanging just slightly off the ground. Backup arrived within minutes, and the scene was locked down for processing. In a town that small, officers recognized Dana almost immediately. Given the state of her clothing, investigators suspected a sexual assault had taken place. And when they checked the register and the shop, nothing appeared to be missing, no cash gone, no valuables taken. This ruled out robbery almost instantly. What was left standing was something far more disturbing. This had been personal. While the scene was processed for prints and evidence, Diane gave her full statement. Investigators had little doubt that the man she'd seen jumping from the window was their killer, and because she'd crossed paths with him a second time inside that store, she'd gotten a real look at his face. From her description, police built a composite sketch: a young white male, around 5 feet 9 inches tall, wearing a gray t-shirt and blue jeans. The sketch went out across the area immediately. But even in a town where nearly everyone recognized everyone else, Diane didn't know this man. And she knew a lot of people. Her job selling cleaning products kept her walking the streets, talking to nearly every local business owner in town. This man was a stranger to her. Investigators pulled Dana's appointment book and found her last scheduled client had left hours before the murder. Based on Diane's timeline, the killer likely entered the salon, attacked Dana almost immediately, and dragged her to the back room within a matter of minutes. Then came the first real physical clue: a single fingerprint, lifted from the surface of the water heater. Since the killer had to tie the belt off there personally, investigators were confident this print belonged to him. They ran it, and got a hit close to home. It matched Dana's husband, Mike. For a moment, the case seemed almost solved. Investigators learned that Dana and Mike had recently separated, though no divorce had been filed. That detail alone was enough to bring him in for serious questioning. But the theory collapsed almost as fast as it formed. Mike told police he'd been home that night watching their 2 children, ages 8 and 6 at the time, and both kids confirmed their father never left the house. Beyond that, Mike simply didn't match Diane's description. He was a much larger man, and investigators struggled to picture him fitting through that narrow salon window at all. Everyone close to the couple told police the same thing: yes, Dana and Mike were living apart, but they were on good terms and were actively trying to repair the marriage for their children's sake. Mike voluntarily took a polygraph test and passed with no signs of deception. He also explained the fingerprint easily. He'd personally installed that water heater and did occasional repairs around the salon. Police ruled him out. And just like that, they were back to nothing. Not long after clearing Mike, forensic technicians found something new: a second fingerprint, this one pressed into a smear of blood at the scene. DNA testing confirmed the blood belonged to Dana, which meant this second print almost certainly belonged to her killer. Investigators ran it. No match in any existing database. They compared it against everyone in Dana's circle: family, friends, co-workers, clients. Nothing. Days later, the autopsy results came back, confirming the brutality of the attack. Dana had been strangled. Her body showed extensive bruising consistent with being struck repeatedly. Investigators also confirmed a sexual assault had occurred, and biological evidence was recovered from her body. Here's the frustrating part: this was 1995. The national DNA database that law enforcement relies on today simply didn't exist yet in a usable form. There was no quick upload, no automatic match, no shortcut. The only path forward was old-fashioned and painfully slow: collect DNA samples from possible suspects, one at a time, and compare them by hand. Police began working through a growing list of local men. Sample after sample came back negative. If you're still with me at this point in the story, I want you to do something. Drop a comment right now that just says, "I'm still here." I want to see exactly how many of you are still locked in, as this case is about to take a turn none of us saw coming. Alright, let's keep going. Just as the investigation was stalling completely, a new witness came forward. A man named Ken said that on the night of the murder, he'd driven past Dana's salon and noticed something off. The lights were out, but Dana's car was still parked outside. And nearby, in the lot of a neighboring business that Ken himself worked at, he spotted a man standing beside a white and blue Ford Bronco. Ken knew that lot should have been empty. The business had already closed for the night. The stranger stared back at him with a tense, almost aggressive look until Ken drove past and out of sight. Ken placed this sighting at roughly 8:40 in the evening, just after the estimated time of the murder. This gave investigators their first real lead in weeks, a specific type of vehicle. They began cross-referencing local Bronco owners, and a handful of names came up as possibilities. But suspicion wasn't proof, and none of it was strong enough to make an arrest. Months dragged by. The case grew colder by the week. For a small town, the fear was constant. Everyone understood a violent killer was still walking among them, and police seemed no closer to catching him than they'd been on night one. Residents tried to help in whatever way they could. Any time someone spotted a white and blue Ford Bronco anywhere nearby, they'd call it in. Even Dana's own children, still just kids, learned to recognize the vehicle police were searching for, and would tell their father whenever they saw one drive by. None of it led anywhere. Several months after the murder, with the investigation nearly frozen, a call came in from the county jail. An inmate told detectives that his cellmate, a man named Russell Quinn, might be connected to Dana's death. According to the inmate, Russell frequently brought up Dana's name unprompted, calling her beautiful, and claimed to have a photograph of her. At one point, he'd allegedly admitted outright that he had killed her. Detectives dug into Russell's background and found he'd been free at the time of the murder. He was now incarcerated for a separate sexual assault charge, and in that case, he had tied his victim to a tree. The parallel to Dana being tied to the water heater was impossible to ignore. He also drove a similar vehicle, and his general appearance closely matched the composite sketch built from Diane's description. Investigators built a photo lineup, placing Russell alongside 5 other men, and showed it to Diane. Without hesitation, she pointed to Russell. For the first time in months, it looked like the case might finally be over. Detectives sent Russell's DNA to the lab, fully expecting confirmation. Instead, the results came back with a gut punch: no match. Russell Quinn was not their killer. One of their strongest leads in the entire case, gone in an instant. After that devastating dead end, momentum in the investigation nearly disappeared entirely. Months turned into years. The case went fully cold. Dana's family held on to hope for as long as they could, but even her own children eventually stopped expecting an answer. 10 years passed exactly like that. By the time a decade had gone by, Dana's daughter, Ashley, was 18 years old and had just started college. One afternoon, she pulled into a local auto shop for a routine oil change, nothing more than an errand, the kind of small task that fills up an ordinary day. While she waited outside for her car, one of the mechanics working there noticed something. He turned to a coworker and said Ashley looked remarkably like a woman who had been murdered in town, 10 years earlier. His coworker told him plainly, "That's because she's her daughter. That's Dana's daughter." The mechanic froze. He hadn't even known Dana had children. And in that moment, something he'd been carrying quietly for a decade came rushing back to the surface. He wasn't connected to the murder itself. But he believed, and had believed for 10 years, that he knew the name of the person responsible. A decade earlier, when this mechanic was only 17 years old, he'd picked up the phone and called police anonymously. He told them Dana's murder might have been committed by another 17-year-old he knew, a young man named Jonathan Vick. At the time, investigators looked into it. They learned Jonathan's mother owned a white and blue Ford Bronco, and that Jonathan himself had been driving that exact vehicle on the night of the murder. But his mother shut the investigation down before it could go anywhere. She refused to let police speak with her son. She refused to let them examine the vehicle. She insisted her son had nothing to do with any of it and demanded they leave her family alone. Investigators tried to secure a warrant to collect Jonathan's DNA and fingerprints, but the judge declined to sign off, unwilling to authorize it based solely on a single anonymous phone call. With no legal way forward, police had no choice but to back off. And the lead went cold along with everything else. Now, 10 years later, standing outside that auto shop, the same caller was ready to speak again. This time, officers made something clear: if he wanted this to matter, he couldn't stay anonymous any longer. He understood. He gave them his full name. He was 27 years old now, the same age Dana had been the night she died, and he told them everything. According to Michael, on the night of the murder, his friend Jonathan had given him a ride home in his mother's white and blue Ford Bronco. During that drive, Jonathan mentioned, almost casually, that he was planning to get his hair done later that night. Michael thought that was strange, it was already late in the evening for an appointment. Jonathan clarified he wasn't going for the haircut itself. He was going because of Dana. Both of them knew her. Jonathan had been a client at her salon multiple times, just like his mother. Then Jonathan's tone shifted. He started talking about how attractive he found Dana, and said, plainly, that he wanted to sleep with her. Michael assumed he was joking. Dana was roughly a decade older than Jonathan, and responded with a smirk. Jonathan didn't take that well. He snapped back, something along the lines of, "You don't think I can do it?" Michael still brushed it off as bravado. The conversation ended there, and he didn't think much more about it that night. The next day, when news broke about Dana's murder, Michael refused to even entertain the idea that his friend could be involved. But once police publicly stated they were searching for a white Ford Bronco, doubts started creeping in. Then Jonathan approached him directly, and told him he would kill him if he ever told anyone about that conversation in the car. That thread is exactly why Michael made that first anonymous call all those years ago. He was terrified, but he also couldn't carry the weight of what he suspected in complete silence. 10 years later, it was the thought of Dana's children, growing up without their mother, still waiting for an answer, that finally pushed him to attach his name to the truth. With Michael now willing to testify on the record, a judge finally signed off on a warrant to collect Jonathan's DNA. By this point, Jonathan was living roughly a 30-minute drive from the town where Dana had been killed. In the years since the murder, he had served 2 years in the Marine Corps, gotten married, and had a daughter of his own. Despite that, he had never managed to hold down steady long-term work. When the DNA results came back, they matched the biological evidence recovered from Dana's body a decade earlier. Jonathan Vick was arrested and charged with the murder of Dana Satterfield. For 10 years, Dana's family lived without answers. Her children grew up wondering if the person who took their mother would ever be held accountable. And in the end, it wasn't a lab breakthrough or a task force that cracked this case open, it was a mechanic noticing a resemblance at an oil change, and a grown man finally choosing courage over silence. If this story moved you the way it moved me putting it together, do 3 things before you go. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next case we cover. Drop a comment telling me which part of this story shocked you the most. Was it the anonymous call that got ignored, or the 10 years it took for the truth to surface? And give this video a like, because it genuinely helps us bring these stories to more people who deserve to hear them. This has been the Cold Case Archive. I'll see you in the next one.